educational or mixed use. And obviously there was a lot more residential in concept approved as part of the GDP. At some point, and I don't recall where it is, so maybe staff could highlight that, I don't know, but there was a initial approval for, or I should say approval for, an initial 146 units. And in the first campus, we built the middle blue building, and if I recall, that was something like 53 units, if I recall. And then the next campus, Campus 2, are the two blue buildings that are flanking the center one on the GDP there. And these are modified GDPs, amendments to the GDP, and those were approved along with the PIPs. So Campus 2 was approved. So Campus 1 was actually built and is open and is almost completely leased up.
Can I interrupt you just for a second? Those three that you've identified here, the three buildings that are put up right now, they were not initially going to be residential, were they?
There was, at this location where the blue buildings
Right.
are located, no, there was a medical/office building planned at that location at the early stages.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what is currently residential that's being built right now was not originally intended to be residential. Is that right?
That's correct.
And all the residential was going to be in the gold, the buildings that are identified as gold here. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
But this is a general development plan. This is
Yeah.
a general statement of uses and intent.
Okay.
It's not intended to be specific. But the city approved moving that up in order to get you recall the economy crashed, and if you remember that one. And, the world changed. And so we made an effort, I came forth and said I would make an effort to prime the pump, if you recall me saying that, and try to get development going at this location. We originally did, TUL Properties originally did have, Kohl's department store interested, but then the city also approved retail zoning on the east side of the city as well as the Reinke property, which then caused competition to happen, which then caused Kohl's to pull back, and then that delay allowed the economy to crash during that time, and then the whole retail opportunity disappeared, although retail is starting to come back now, but it's still going to be slow. So Campus 2, just, again, Campus 1 is open, full. Campus 2 is opening up. One building is already opened up and is starting to lease, and the other one is about to open up in about a month and a half. That's going very well. And we're proposing Campus 3, and that would be 40 units, which completes the initial 146 number that was approved as an initial start. And this will be in compliance with the GDP in the sense it's got the apartments and it has a retail component. We are going to try to get a third-party tenant to operate a fitness center there, but that retail component could be fitness, it could be restaurant or food, it could be anything that a retailer would think appropriate, but our first choice would be a fitness center, especially since Epic, I'm told, does not have a fitness center, and there's a strong demand for the one that we have in Phase 1, and that demand is overwhelming the size of the fitness center we have currently. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'll jump ahead a little bit now. Do you anticipate that at some point you will be asking Verona to approve for the West End more than 146 total units?
What we are here tonight is informational to get your feedback and your input and answer your questions on the application that will be before you in the first meeting in June, which will be coming to you to formally ask for approval of this PIP. Staff has asked, and I'll let Eric comment here in a minute. Staff has asked that the whole GDP be looked at, which I think is appropriate, and look at, in the context of today's economy, what would be the appropriate uses and layout, et cetera. Maybe Eric could comment a little. Eric's an attorney. He's our counsel representing us on different projects and here to help answer some of the questions that you might have.
Sure. Eric McLeod, and I represent TWAL Enterprises, who's the applicant on this particular request. I think it's important to recognize that TWAL Enterprises is a separate and distinct entity from the owner of the GDP, which is TWAL Properties. The, as Mr. Wall has just indicated, the request that he is here to discuss ultimately is this particular building with 40 units, the fitness center. As to other aspects of the GDP, those fall within the control of T-Wall Properties, which is controlled by a separate board of directors. And if there are issues related to the GDP overall, ultimately those questions, those issues have to be directed to T-Wall Properties. I don't represent T-Wall Properties. I represent T-Wall Enterprises. So as to whether or not, to Mr. Heinzen's question about whether or not there will be a request for additional apartment units, that's not on the table here, and I couldn't speak on behalf of T-Wall Properties as to whether they would have any intent to proceed in that manner as to the larger GDP.
I don't intend to be dense, but can you draw the distinction for us between T-Wall Enterprises and T-Wall Properties? Again, I'm sorry,
Sure.
I guess I'm not familiar exactly what that distinction is.
Sure. T-Wall Enterprises is a separate entity that is, other than the name, which is by virtue of the fact that both entities were founded originally by Terrence Wall, they are separate and distinct entities. Mr. Wall is operating T-Wall Enterprises. He is a member of the board of T-Wall Properties, but T-Wall Properties is controlled by a separate board which has outside investors. And the issue of what, as to what T-Wall Properties may do is not, Mr. Wall is not in a position to be able to speak for that entity. They are separate and distinct, and to my knowledge have no legal connection. T-Wall Enterprises is a buyer of these properties, so it owns the other multifamily units. It intends to develop this unit that's on the table, but it is not operating on behalf of or in connection with T-Wall Properties in any respect other than a buyer of portions of this overall GDP.
Can you tell us what portions of the GDP Enterprises owns?
Well, those that have been developed, the blue or purplish blue multifamily units that are depicted on the GDP now, and they are the buyer of the unit that is on the table for approval.
Which is Unit F? Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's depicted
F and
as
G? Okay.
correct.
Go ahead,
You're on?
Mr.
Okay.
Heinz.
And I guess the next question is, when you were in here, and I don't remember when it was exactly, but to get approval to put up the first apartment, which is the, I guess, I'm gonna call it V, you had stated that, this sort of the jumpstart, you told us that the UW Credit Union was waiting for some activity out there before they would come out. And now the question I have for you, I guess, is, then and now, are you speaking, that statement, was that a statement in connection with what T-Wall Properties was looking forward to, or what Enterprises was looking forward to? And I guess my question, even more specifically, is do you have an ownership interest in QPN, which are those proposed commercial buildings that are, abut West Verona Avenue?
I spoke to the credit union over, I don't know how long, it was a year, I don't know, a while ago. And at the time, they told me that if we got some activity going out here, apartments in particular, that they would make the recommendation to their board to begin the development of their credit union. They have purchased that property known as N and closed on it. They own it, and they can begin development anytime they choose. Maybe Eric can speak to, again, we don't control them and what their decisions are. We have been told that they would move forward once activity started, and we'd hope that that would be very soon. Parcel S, as you see there, the hotel, was also sold to a hotel developer, and we were under the understanding they were going to move forward also. We've been pushing them to get started. I even brought in a potential buyer to buy that parcel from them, and, who wanted to get started on a hotel, and to date, they have not acted upon that opportunity, and we've been urging them to move forward. Again, we don't control them as a hotel developer. They are independent. Do you have any comments?
No, and I don't know, you don't have an ownership interest in QRP.
No. So, yeah, I mean, T-Wall Properties owns the rest of this. We have separate investors in the companies. And I chose to, at the urging of the city, try to prime the pump. My New York investors in T-Wall Properties were not interested in multifamily development, and so I took it upon myself to set up a separate company and begin multifamily development at the city's urging, and take that risk. And that's where T-Wall Enterprises was formed with separate investors.
Okay.
To try to help get the development going. And the multifamily has done very well, by the way.
And does Enterprises own any other properties right now in this GDP?
No,
Okay, so F&G is the last one that you currently own.
that's under contract.
That's under
Or would
contract,
be
right?
under contract if you, yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you for the background, that's helpful.
Mr. Wall, any background that you wanted to provide?
Just, again, that the apartments here have done very well. They're almost fully occupied except for normal turnover vacancy. They're heavily occupied by Epic employees. People are, the residents there seem to be pleased with, the apartments. We have more demand. Epic has about 6,200 employees currently. They're hiring 1,000 to 1,500 this year. And my belief or understanding is that hiring trend may continue for a number of years. And, we're looking at filling 40 more units here in Campus 3 that would comprise less than 0.4% of 1%. 0.4 of 1% of the number of Epic employees in Verona. Generally speaking, we'd love to do more apartments in Verona, here or elsewhere in Verona. If you would allow us to do that, there's certainly a large demand for it. The Epic employees are well-behaved and well compensated, and frequently not there Monday through Friday, and have done been a terrific customer for these buildings. So we would love to do more. If you'd let us do more here or anywhere else in the city, if you have recommendations.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could
Go
make just a couple of additional comments, and the first has to do with the point Mr. Sayer made regarding the limitation on the number of units that can be developed in the city of Verona. I believe it was in September of last year, limit to maximum of 50, 25 to 50 units. Our understanding is that, at least we understand that there is a general understanding that this GDP would be grandfathered in under that limitation, such that we would not be subject to, competition for, whatever additional apartment proposals there may be out there. Now, as Mr. Sayer indicated, perhaps we're the only one that's currently on the table, but ultimately we still want some recognition in this process that the GDP here and the number of units that are approved under this GDP would be grandfathered in under that limitation. That's one item, and we'd appreciate your comments on that to the extent you have any. The other item is simply to again acknowledge what Mr. Sayer had stated, and that is that staff believes that the PIP here that's being proposed is in compliance with the GDP, and we would certainly agree with that. We think it's, while there are some tweaks around the edges here, it's ultimately what's been approved previously by the city, and in light of the fact that it is in compliance with the GDP, we believe it's appropriate that it be approved. And again, would appreciate any comments that this committee has this evening on that issue as well, so that we can be prepared to address any such issues next month when we appear for action.
Mr. Wall?
Yes, so to be, more specific, to say that if anyone on the planning commission has any issues with what we're proposing, keeping in mind that the colors, the materials, the building shape, and everything's going to be exactly as the other buildings and in compliance with the GDP, we'd really appreciate your giving us that feedback now very specifically, so that we could try to address any issues with staff between now and June, so we don't come back in June and be surprised. We'd like to know if there's an issue. If we were coming forth with a different brick color or something, you might raise that as an issue. We're coming forth with the same colors and materials, same shape, same everything. So please do let us know today so that we can address those issues.
Questions or comments from the planning commission members? Mr. Littner?
Just so I'm clear, let's say this 40-unit apartment is approved. T-Wall Properties could come in June or July and want to put any number of apartments anywhere else on this plan without you guys, and you guys both say it wasn't me.
No, only to the extent that they would be consistent with the GDP, and I think that we're up to our limit on the GDP already with 146 units.
But you're asking for an amendment to the
So-
GDP, and they could do the same thing.
We're not asking for an amendment to the GDP. We believe that the PIP that's on the table here is consistent with the GDP. And to the extent T-Wall Properties were to seek something else, they would need to seek specific approval for that.
I mean, just because you got apartments here doesn't make it the same as it was. I know you said it's relatively same. I don't know if I agree with it being relatively, the same. To me, there's a big difference. You're spreading, what used to be apartments down in the yellow and back, I believe, back by this area, there was supposed to be apartments. Now it's all up here. That's a difference.
But again, those changes are a result of prior approvals of amendments to the underlying GDP. So Mr. Heinzen was talking about what was originally approved back in 2007, and subsequent to that original approval, there were amendments to the GDP made. So what you're seeing here on this document is in fact what has been approved for this GDP. So the point being that
Apartments, 40-unit apartments were proposed for Unit F in the GDP
Yes.
that was approved?
it says apartments and commercial for F.
Okay, so that is not the same as what you're proposing today, because it doesn't say, it wasn't 40 units, was it?
It doesn't have a specific number of units associated with that, does it? But it is ultimately what we're proposing here is multifamily and commercial, with the commercial being the fitness center that's being included with that building. And so we believe it is consistent with the GDP, and staff takes the same view, I think, because it is fairly straightforward in terms of what was previously approved on the GDP.
I was going to ask Mr. Sarah if he would comment.
Yeah, so what was approved in 2007 was, besides the blue area, the purplish blue area we've been talking about, that was shown as an office building of some type. And I believe in 2010, 2011, the developer came back and then amended that GDP to have some buildings there. And in the GDP amendment, that's where the units were specified for those purplish bluish buildings. That's where there are numbers placed down as units. However, when that amendment took place, the 146 still stayed in place. That never got amended. That was always the number that was in there, and that came out of a parking analysis and a variety of other things. So yes, that was, to your point, that was part of the issue when Terrence and I first met. I said, well, how, and that goes, the issue I raised was, well, we're pushing up to that 146, and that's where my comment came in of, we need to revisit the whole thing, because the reality is we've hit that 146. If the planning commission were to approve this and council approve it, we've hit the 146. We do have to look at the overall plan. So regarding the yellow area south of the proposed 40 units, if T-Wall Enterprises or T-Wall, I don't know all the entities, but whoever would come in and they were asked to do something down there and it included apartments, no, they could not do it. They'd have to amend the GDP. They would have to amend the GDP because the GDP specifically says 146 units.
So you're saying this, by making this from what it was approved in 2011 to today is not amending to GDP?
The opinion of staff's opinion is that it is consistent with the GDP. And the reason I say that is it still falls within the 146 units. The building in general is similar to what was approved there. You have a commercial end cap on the front, and then you have apartments. Yes, it was mixed use. Yes, I'm not going to dispute that. But the intent of a general development plan is to be somewhat general, and there has to be some flexibility in there. And the point of a PIP is to be precise, how many units exactly and what they're actually doing. And that's the opinion of staff. So generally, is it consistent? Yes, I believe it's generally consistent.
Mr. Linder?
Okay, my initial point was that because there's two different entities now involved, that if this gets approved, that T-Wall Properties come by and take an overall look at the whole thing and decide we want more apartments and they want to amend the GDP. And they could do that, and then somebody'd say, well, we just put in 146 units, and they say, we had nothing to do with that. You know, that was T-Wall Enterprises, that was not us. And so that's one of my concerns. And the second thing is, as far as if this should be grandfathered in, I don't believe that was the intent of the rule in September, to have the grandfathered in, because these are, that was my impression, that it was how many were built per year.
Mr.
Otherwise,
Sarah?
you could grandfather in every multi-family unit that's zoned in the city.
Yeah, that statement came from me. What I told Terrence was, and I think he kind of said it correctly, was from a staff standpoint, it would be our opinion that this wouldn't be hindered by that policy. And the reason for that is you have an approved GDP that still is current. So you've in essence approved a plan allocating those units already. And from our standpoint, it'd be difficult to say, well, we approved something in the past and now we're not going to let you implement it because of a future policy. I don't want to call it grandfathering, but there is a slight entitlement to that from a staff standpoint.
I don't believe that was the intent at the time.
And if I
Go
may
ahead,
just
Mr.
address
McLeod.
that, I think there is a legal issue involved here, and I think, as Mr. Sayer was perhaps suggesting, that there has been an approval for a certain number of units here already, and to in effect say, well, you're no longer entitled to that many because we've now limited it to some smaller number, would be a denial of the prior approval that has already been granted. So we do think it's akin to a grandfathering to the extent that there is that we're the only game in town, so to speak, here that's made a proposal to the city for multifamily yet this year. Maybe it's not that big of an issue, but we do think it's an important issue to bring up so that it's discussed. And I want to touch on what Mr. Linder said concerning, what T-Wall Properties may do with respect to additional multifamily within this GDP. Ultimately, if T-Wall Properties or anyone else who acquires portions of this property seek to build additional multifamily, they would need to obtain an amendment to this GDP. We don't need an amendment because it's already been approved as part of the GDP. And a final point that I'll make is that T-Wall Enterprises, as a separate entity, really does stand in similar shoes to the hotel developer that has acquired that property targeted for hotel development on the GDP, as well as the credit union entity that acquired that property for that purpose. To the extent T-Wall Properties, again, wants to make decisions that are different than what's reflected on the GDP, they would need to come in and make a request of the city to amend the GDP before anything different occurs. And so long as what we're proposing is consistent with the GDP, we believe it's appropriate that it be approved. And again, why we're here is seeking any feedback you've got so we know where we're headed next month.
The Common Council did not take any official action on the grandfathering. There was some limited conversations when we talked about the policy, and I would ask Mr. Burns, see if you have some comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the policy as it was established did not set a hard and fast limit. It set a target range, and it purposely left latitude for the city council to be able to approve items within that target range, as well as have exceptions to be able to go beyond that for certain circumstances. The language in the policy itself that comes closest to this point says the limit shall be implemented through the use of the city's zoning authority for conditional use permits and planned unit developments. Exactly how the interpretation of items where there was an existing planned unit development, I think, is an issue for the Common Council based on advice of the city attorney. So I just wanted to point out that it was not intended that it would be a hard and fast limit, but rather something for the council to look at, and I think that's a question for the city council as well as advice from the city attorney to make that determination.
Mr. Heinzen?
Sure, thanks. Do I understand though, and I think this is what you said, Eric, as a practical matter, this grandfathering question may not be an issue because nobody else has come to the city yet asking to build apartments. And so maybe that's not that big of a question or an issue. But I do have two questions beyond that. From what you said earlier, is it your position that as a legal matter, the proposal that's before us here is sufficiently consistent with the general development plan that we must approve it?
Yes.
Okay. And next question is this. Let's say John Doe has already entered into a contract with T-Wall Properties for building number E. Okay? And they show up in June and tell us that they want to build an apartment building there, and we haven't approved yours yet. Are you, T-Wall Enterprises and John Doe, who now owns E, basically competing for approval for the exact same 46 apartments? 40. Okay. So you're first, from your position, you are the first owner of property, part of the general development plan, who has come to us asking permission to build a new apartment building.
I think that's right. If some third-party developer acquires another portion of the property within the GDP and comes in afterwards for a similar approval, I think it would be precluded by the fact that we're here today.
And the point being that if this non-entity had come in last month and we said, yeah, go ahead and do it, we'd get up to 146 fully subscribed, and any more apartments, whether it's done by T-Wall Enterprises or any other third party, would need to work with the owner of the GDP, which is T-Wall Properties, for an amendment to the GDP to allow for more than 146 units. Am I getting that
I
correct?
think that's right. I think
Okay.
that's right.
Mr. Lytle? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Mr.
and I would
Wall?
agree with that, yes.
Okay, thanks.
We'd probably be even here opposing it. T-Wall Enterprises.
Trying to get all the entities together.
But I think one thing that's confusing, that was raised over here before, I want to clarify, is that, Jack, we're not here saying that, that we can go put more apartments in beyond 146.
I understand.
Yeah, but the city has asked T-Wall Properties, right, that to take a look at the overall GDP and see what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I think that's a wise decision on the part of the city, because otherwise, in today's economy, this could be sitting here for years. What else can you do to prime the pump to get economic development going here? It's a good point.
Mr. Lytle?
Thank you. I guess just to take a slight step back, hopefully with the goal of taking steps forward, I think this was the first large multi-use project I was involved with on the Plan Commission, and perhaps I was a little naive at the time, thinking that the GDP we approved and the buildings and the layout and the count for the different buildings would be what would be built over the next 5 to 10 years. But in the years that have gone by, I realized that this is a plan that made sense at the time, that represented your best guess of a saleable, marketable property, and obviously conditions have changed. And as we communicated, I thought, fairly clearly to your architect last month, we recognize that. We, to the extent that each of us is comfortable are interested in this project being successful based on the conditions in 2013 or 2014 or 2016. But what, for me personally, was really missing here was how the shifting of the apartments to closer to Verona Avenue, how changing multi-use buildings into single-use buildings still met with the spirit of new urbanism that you were trying to do out here. Now, maybe new urbanism needs to become new urbanism based on what you're seeing in the market now. But what's a little bit frustrating for me is I thought we were very clear that we were interested in having discussion with you, whether you're wearing the hat of T-Wall Enterprises or T-Wall Properties, of sort of realigning your goals for the overall GDP and explaining how a single-use building at this location made sense with the overall GDP. For me personally, I think, yes, by right, you have granted through the GDP process the ability to put in more apartments, and I have every intention of supporting you putting up more apartments. But what I would have liked to have seen here this month, if you're truly seeking our feedback versus explaining legal realities to us, is a representative from T-Wall Properties explaining the steps you were going through to sort of re-baseline your GDP for the property. And for me personally, I will not be issuing any more specific recommendations or feedback in terms of what this building looks like until I see some more specifics of the GDP, of a revised GDP.
Mr. Horsfall?
I guess I want to echo Patrick's comments. I don't know if the architect, I assume the architect talked to you about how the plan commission felt about this, and that, just to paraphrase, I don't think there was much approval or much support, that's a good word for it, support for moving forward with this. So again, when I saw this in the plan, or in the agenda, I was a little bit surprised, like Patrick was, that, you know, for me, I'm not going to support this moving forward. So if you come next week with a proposal, I'm going to not vote for it. So, thanks.
Mr. Linder?
Yeah, I think I'll give you the same feedback I gave your guy last week, in that, you know, I was here since the beginning, and you came with us to say you needed to prime the pump to get stuff going. I get apartments, that'll get the credit union, I get a hotel, that get stuff moving, and what I see is it prime the pump for more apartments, and that I feel like, I don't know, just didn't sit well with me. Feels like we've been taken, and you say, well, that's their property, they can do with it, that's their hotel, that's their property, they can do what they want. It didn't come across that way when you presented it first time. You said, you made it sound like it was gonna, you know, that's what's gonna happen. So, you know, you come with a legal argument that we have to approve it. I don't know. I'm still not very excited about it. Nothing here really changed my mind on what makes me excited about this.
Other comments? The two things that I'm hearing is people are very pleased with the quality of the 3 buildings that are already up, and there's no questions about that at all. And they're not concerned that we won't require that same level of quality moving forward. But the 2 issues are, number 1, the total amount of multifamily housing that we have in the city, and then the second point is how much multifamily housing we have in one dense location, and that's what they're worried about moving forward. So those 2 issues. So, you know, not saying that we can't have any multifamily, it's just a lot in one area, and that's part of the concern. Mr. Wall, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. As far as when you develop multifamily, you want to have at least a minimum of 150 units. I mean, preferably 250 units in one location. It takes at least 150 to 250 units to support an on-site manager full-time and on-site maintenance personnel full-time. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to provide those services because you're trying to split somebody between, you know, as we are now, trying to split somebody between here and another project in another location in the greater Dane County area, And that's very difficult to do, and you cannot provide good service doing that. Residents, you know, with a full-time manager and maintenance, you've got residents who can pop in and get their issues and questions and concerns addressed right there on site all the time during the week. So that's why, you know, having something like, I mean, generally speaking, at least 150 is very, very important. I understand what you're saying about the your concerns about the GDP. Nobody has said we're not interested in looking at the GDP. I mean, you know, Jeff Lee, a member of T-Well Properties, one of the staff there, will be here in June to look at that. Your staff has asked that the GDP be looked at the overall picture, and when we met with your staff, with T-Well Properties and T-Well Enterprise together, the response was positive that the entire GDP, I'd be happy to look at the entire GDP, you know, that's what, you know, but I can't personally commit anything. I've got to go through the board, and I have outside investors from out of state, and they need to be involved in that decision, and I don't have any personal authority to represent that.
But obviously, they have an interest in seeing this be successful and get the necessary approvals, so I'm
Right.
assuming that's a conversation they would be interested in anyway, not because the city of Verona is being a pain about your
Right.
PIP.
Right, well, in fact, it may be, you want to be careful, I think it may be misinterpreted. In other words, the reverse may be true. In other words, they're happy, they've said, right, in the meeting with you, that they would take a look at the GDP. I mean, I think that's totally appropriate, given the economy has changed, the world's changed, and retailers are looking for something different again. Retailers have shrunk their box sizes, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of different parameters now that retailers look at. You know, take Sun Prairie. I mean, they're incredibly flexible. You know, they got Target out there, then they got Costco out there. They're in the process of getting another retailer out there right now that will be incredible for Dane County. But because they're incredibly flexible to make things happen and go out of their way, and they're not hung up on, you know, on getting locked into something and it can't change. You know, they have to adjust. Every time a retailer comes forth, they have to adjust and change their plan to accommodate that retailer to make it happen. And that, you know, Marcus Theater is going to move from the city of Madison out to Sun Prairie to rebuild a new theater because Madison at that time was unwilling to be flexible on very minor things, and so they went to Sun Prairie and they got approval within 60 days, practically. It was incredible. So the point is that, you know, we'd like to move forward to build the 40 units that we have our GDP approval on. We're, you know, being consistent. It is a mixed use. Some of you have said it's a single use. It's not. It is a mixed use. We are providing the retail in a mixed use building, and frankly, a sizable amount of retail, given the economy and the likelihood of this location supporting retail off of West Verona Avenue without that frontage on the road. The more we can do here, the more likely is that credit union will move forward. I can't make any guarantees. I can't control them. All I can do is tell you what they told me, which was a year ago, you know, that they would move forward if we built enough apartments. But, you know, I think the reverse is true to get at that issue, that if the GDP, or excuse me, if this PIP were not approved, I honestly think that you will see nothing happen here. If we can't move forward with what we legally are entitled to approve forward, that we have vested interests in moving, you know, entitlements for, I don't see, you know, our guys in New York, the investors in New York, approving anything. I mean, why bother? You know, if that's the way it's going to be, we can't even count on our vested rights. You know, I mean, maybe you can comment on that, but you know, we've worked hard to come up with a plan that I think that complies with the GDP, but also accommodates the economy and the world in terms of what retailer will want to locate off of West Verona Avenue. It's going to have to be something that serves the needs of the residents, these 146 units. Most likely that would be something like a fitness center or maybe some food or something. But it's going to have to be a retailer that doesn't count on traffic coming off of West Verona Avenue and seeing them down here, you know, and going and patronizing their business. They're going to have to be supported by the 146 apartments. So I think we've tried hard to do that. You know, we'd like to move forward with that. I understand what your concerns are. I think you have to take the opposite approach and say, you know, let's approve this, let's keep moving forward the development, and then yes, let's sit down and look at the GDP, and that's a process. I don't know, Adam, maybe you could comment. how long of a process that might be to go through to look at the GDP.
Mr. Sarah?
It'd probably take a few months. I mean, obviously meeting with staff and coming back to the plan commission for discussion, and then, you know, obviously if working out what the future goals of this this parcel is. I mean, yeah, it'd probably take 3-4 months to look at that.
Mr. Heinzen?
I think I just have a couple more questions. And that has to do with the other properties here who for T-Wall Properties is the front person trying to encourage businesses to build in this area, in the West End? Is that you, or is it somebody else entirely now?
There's different staff for different purposes. So T-Wall Properties has a development team. We have a development staff, right? And they work on the development issues, you know, entitlements, city approvals, things like that. The company has hired a commercial broker. The board approved hiring, and I approved as part of a board member, hiring a commercial broker who is actively going out and now marketing these big box sites. And they went to the International Council of Shopping Center Convention I don't know, it was about a month, no, probably 2 months now, 3 months ago, out west, and are starting to promote this site for big box retail development. Sites, you know, like could be a Lowe's, Kohl's, whatever.
Okay.
So that's you hire a broker to do that. You know, I'm not a broker. I'm not connected with the retailers, but I can do that. But you really need somebody who's full-time on the job, and I can tell you that somebody is full-time on the job doing that right now.
Okay, that's helpful. And how many local I'm saying, you know, South Central Wisconsin individuals have an ownership interest in West End? And I would say, actually, maybe not West End, in T-Wall Properties. Is it all outside investors now, people from New York, or are there some local connections who have an ownership interest in seeing this property developed and be successful?
There are 200 local investors in T-Wall Properties, along with a New York private equity firm and myself.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Linder?
Based on our discussion here, it almost seems to me appropriate to review this GDP before approving the apartments. It seems like there might be a piece of the puzzle that might stay this, you know, what's proposed, might change. I know he's saying, I'm sure you don't want to wait, but that'd be my thoughts, is that look at the whole GDP and then decide if that's appropriate place for more apartments.
Mr. Lytle?
I understand where Jack's coming from. I don't know that I would be to that degree, but just to reiterate, so I'm very clear about this. I think what you did extremely well with the initial version of the West End was explain how this layout, this general layout, contributed to the right kind of live, work, shop, sort of flow of life, and to me that made a lot of sense. And as I mentioned, conditions have changed, and the shifting of the residential units to the front of the property, and then having a separate residential unit across basically the main entrance to the property, I see some conflicts there. I see more difficulty phasing between big box to small commercial retail to apartments over retail to some very large apartment buildings. And what I'm asking you to do, or you can communicate to whoever in T-Wall Properties to do, is come explain to us how in a revised GDP that same vision might be achieved.
Other comments or questions? Any feedback? Any closing comments?
Nope.
Just that, you know, I'm doing everything I can to make this happen, and you know, would appreciate your support. It's not easy, let me tell you. It is not easy right now. You know, there are lenders or loans. You know, lenders want to make loans for multifamily, but there are no lenders making loans for office buildings, I can tell you that, or retail, speculative retail or speculative office. You know, and the retailers out there, the big box, you know, a year ago, they would only go to sites in the United States that had free land. You give them, you know, you get TIF here, and you give them free site, they'll be here. So you want to step up to the plate and make it happen, you can do that. It's in your power. But the next phase will be sites they can get cheaper or less expensively. And then the third phase will be, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, will be sites they're back to normal where they're paying full price for land and going to locations like Verona. But it's you know, it's not easy even convincing. You know, I brought forth a offer. You know, I'm not getting compensation for it, but I went out and brought forth a contact, somebody my sister knew, and brought them into the hotel developer and say, hey, if you don't want to develop this, would you be willing to sell it? And he's, well, actually asked me to look and see if there would be somebody who would buy the site, and an offer was submitted. No decision has been made on that. But, you know, I'm doing that to try to prime the pump for you and for Verona and for this development. You know, went and talked to the credit union, see if we can convince them. You know, I don't control them, can't force them to do anything. So I just want you to know I'm doing everything I can. I would love to look at, you know, the whole GDP, but that's going to take many, many months. I think it'll take more than 6 months. You know, that's a process that takes normally 6 or 12 months. That's a process, happy to go through that and contribute to that process, my input. It's not going to happen overnight. There are certain windows for development. That window is right now. You know, we have to break ground in the summer and open by May or June in order to lease up. If we don't break ground within that window, we can't break ground at all because we will miss the lease-up window of summer in this city. And if you do that, you have an empty building through the winter until spring, you know, for 6 or 8 or 9 months. So you're out of business, and you won't get financing based on that either. So we missed that window because we're waiting on improving the GDP, amended GDP. We missed the whole opportunity. I've got to move on. You know, as T-Wall Enterprise, we have to look at an alternative location then and move on, and you know, we're not going to come back and do that 40 units if we have other developments. I only have so much capacity, right? So much staff, so many resources to be able to develop apartments. And I can't, you know, I've got to pick and choose. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity in Madison right now for development, and they're approving projects within, literally, I got a project approved in 4.5 months there. It's unbelievable how quickly with the new administration things are moving in Madison. And, you know, there's a lot of housing, or a lot of apartments being built there. There's a lot of demand in the city, you know. But you have a great opportunity here, and this still complies with the new urbanism, still complies with all the concepts and everything we talked about. We have to be realistic about getting to a development that can be effective, that we can actually implement given the world where it is today in terms of financing, in terms of the economy, in terms of demand. We're not going to grow at 3 or 4% in the economy now. You know, it's going to be 2.5%. So we're going to have to try to do other things and be creative and be flexible, make some changes. And we want to do that. We want to look at that. But we need your cooperation. You know, you're asking us to do it. We're saying yes. You know, don't get me wrong. We can't go beyond 146 units. There's no question about that. You would have to approve that. So there's no issue there. We have entitlements for the 40, so we should be allowed to move forward with that. So we're working together, but let's not throw up more roadblocks. I mean, let's move forward together and keep moving incrementally what we can to accomplish this plan. Thank you.
Mr. Heinzen.
I'll try to make this brief. First of all, I drive by the apartments every day. I think they look very nice. And earlier you had said if there's any concerns about the materials that are being used, so forth, we have to know about it.
Right.
That's not my concern. And even if we wouldn't have to approve your proposal to move forward, I may say it's just fine as well, but I think to move this all along is
Steve,
possible.
can you put your mic on, please?
Oh, excuse me. Is it possible that you could share with Adam a legal argument as to why we must do that? Sure. Well before our next meeting, so that we have an opportunity to think about it, and because I'll speak for myself at least. I don't want to say no if I am legally obligated to say yes. And if you can share with us your opinion as to why we have to say yes, I think that would be helpful.
We'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Mr. Horsfall?
I just have to say, I've been on the commission for 13 years, and the number of times the lawyers have come up and talked in front of us has been less than a handful. So in a good faith effort between T-Wall and the city, having you come here, to me, is not sending the right message. I understand why you're here, but I just want to say that, and you can, that's all I want to say. Thanks.
I'm not seeing any additional comments at this point, so thank you. Thank both of you for coming this evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We are on agenda item number 11, which is discussion on plan development concept plan for a proposed 91-unit hotel located at 613 West Verona Avenue. Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Thank you. This is a concept review of a plan development for a 91-unit hotel located at 613 West Verona Avenue. The proposed development would be 3 stories and would include underground and both surface parking. The site plan on the screen kind of depicts where the parcel is. It's kind of, I don't want to call it a goofy parcel, but it is a challenging parcel to develop. It does have it does have frontage on 3 sides. That includes Verona Avenue, South Nine Mound, and Half Mile Road. So it's very challenging from a development standpoint. In the past, this was actually proposed at one point for a mixed-use project on this site. It was a first-floor retail, and I think 3 more floors of apartments on the site as well. I think there's been some other proposals in the past as well. So it is challenging, and obviously the history kind of shows that as well. The proposed site would be accessed in 3 points. There'd be access off of Verona Avenue, would be a full access for the time being. There'd also be access off of Half Mile Road, and there'd be access to the underground parking, which would be off of South Nine Mound Road. In the initial review of this, we kind of took a quick look at what possible exemptions may be required as part of the plan development process, and we haven't completely flushed these out yet because this still is the conceptual review of it. But as of right now, we see possibly having a parking exemption. They have underground parking and they have surface parking, but then they're also proposing some on-street parking. And this was discussed, I believe, at the last proposal a couple of years ago as well. And in general, staff was supportive of that at that point, and we continue to be supportive of that on-street parking in that site. It's a low-volume road, and for this site, and how challenging it is, we think that could work. But that'd be an exemption since it would technically be within the city's right-of-way. Second exemption that might be required is a setback exemption. There's 15-foot front yard setbacks on all the north, the west, and the south sides of the property. They may need an exemption from that as they move forward in their plans. The third exemption is they may need a maximum building coverage exemption from the landscape service requirement or the green space requirement. They're pretty much going to put pavement on most of the site. So those are the 3 exemptions we've tentatively identified with the applicant. Looking at the architecture, very, very rough renderings and sketches were in the plans, and actually in your packet there was a color rendering that was submitted that was actually a 4-story one. What they're proposing is a 3-story, so I just first want to say that. We haven't talked too much about architectural details at this point. What we've encouraged the applicant to do is to look at using stone or brick material on the road-facing street frontages. The one feature that they need to keep in place for Fairfield Inn and Suites is this wave type entrance. That's more of a signature of Fairfield Suites, and staff is willing to work with the applicants on that. But as we refine the materials and the look of the building, we'll be encouraging that brick and that stone look to it as well. It's important to note as well, they're showing a lot of windows along Verona Avenue, so that's a nice feature to have to kind of give it more of that pedestrian feel, that more of that the urban look to it as well. One challenge for the developer is actually involving the land that's on the site. And the picture on the screen right now, the black hash marks, it kind of forms a, I don't know, what is that, 5 sides, 4 sides, whatever shape that is. That's the existing property line. So it's got a goofy configuration. And what the applicant's proposing is to, through a variety of land swaps, change the property line to this dark blue line itself. Right now, in this northeast corner, that area of the property is controlled by DOT. That's DOT land, part of the stormwater pond. The applicant's proposing to acquire this piece of land from DOT and then in the process swap this triangle with DOT for their stormwater ponds. They want to swap the land there. The northwest corner, this corner piece, this vision triangle, is actually owned and controlled by the city. It's within city right of way. So the applicant would need to swap this piece of parcel for land along here. They're proposing to have the city give them this piece of land, and they would swap for right of way along Half Mile Road. And finally, there's a strip of land along here, which is owned by DOT, that is controlled by the county. So there's 3 entities they're going to have to work through on this project, and it's challenging. That makes the site even more challenging from its shape, but also from the landowners they're going to have to work with. And that's something they'll have to work out before they would move forward with their GDP plans. We haven't really had a good chance to take a look at the stormwater and drainage. Tentatively looking at it, they're going to probably ask to use some drainage in the pond to the east, and they also may have to do some underground storage as well. Comprehensive plan, we identify this as a commercial use in this area. The hotel obviously fits with that use. And in general, from a staff perspective, we're supportive of this. We think it's an interesting idea. Obviously, there's a hotel nearby. Obviously, T-Wall is proposing a hotel out there as well. So you're kind of seeing some hotel development in the area. And the belief is that, you know, you already have one hotel to the east. If you get this hotel, it might start spurring some redevelopment in the area. It might kind of be a catalytic project to kind of hopefully get some more of that commercial going. You'll have more people there, more visitors coming to the area. And we're hopeful with what they're proposing that this could be a viable, you know, option for this very challenging site. So with that said, right now this is at step 2 of the plan development process. This is the concept review. The intent of this step is for you to engage the applicant, provide them feedback, give them ideas, and then what happens after this is they also go to the Common Council. And the Common Council will do the same thing. They will give the applicant feedback and give them ideas of generally, what do you think of it? Do you support this or not? So with that being said, I encourage you to get, you know, the applicant and the architect are both here. I encourage you to provide them feedback on the project.
Before we move into questions, is there anything that the applicant wishes to state? Okay.
There would be, of course, a huge benefit to the city.
If you would, just identify yourself, please.
My name is Lee Fischel. I'm currently owner of Holiday Inn Express in Rome as well. It would be a big benefit to the city in terms of taxes. We've explored other uses of that site, which Mr. Sarah has indicated, and we have not been able to do much with it. We had met with a couple of restaurateurs and weren't able to get anybody interested to pull the trigger on doing that. So this is the most viable option we've been able to come up with, and feel that it would complement the Holiday Inn we currently own. And there certainly is a demand with Epic, so.
Questions or comments? Mr. Lytle.
I'm sure you're incorporating some of Mr. Gunlock's comments already, but in terms of whether the vision triangle really applies anymore, and just some of the other site issues that you see, can you share some of that with us?
Mr. Gunlock?
The vision triangle isn't needed anymore. When that vision triangle was there, that was a 2-lane road. Now it's been divided. And the stop bar is far enough ahead that the vision triangle is not needed.
Any other, not necessarily the land stops, but the stormwater, the parking on the street,
The stormwater, we haven't seen any calcs yet, so I really can't comment on that. The on-street parking, Half Mile Road is a low volume, street, and I do not see a real issue with angled parking there. If you go to the city of Middleton, just west of their post office, all the buildings in that area, they've a couple hotels and some condos, it's all angled parking. As far as the only other comment is the access off of West Verona Avenue, it has to line up with the median cut that's there. In the future, when we meet traffic warrants there for a signal, then that median cut would have to be closed because it would be too close to the signal.
That's our understanding. It would eventually be right in, right out there. I would add, in terms of the parking issue, that because most of our guests would come from Epic. That parking lot, based this on history of the Holiday Inn, is at 90% of the time, that parking lot isn't even half full because of guests coming from out of town. The only time it does fill up is events from Redden Soccer Field or hockey or some other event going on. And the material, just then on the material side, I know that was brought up too, they would be consistent with the Holiday Inn in terms of brick and some stone on the exterior. We don't want it to look like any less of a hotel than what we currently have.
I think, Bob, I was gonna ask on the angle parking, and I know you said that there's not a lot of traffic there, but even with angle parking, there'd still be 2 lanes of traffic on Half Mile, so they could still go both directions.
Correct. Correct.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Horsfall?
Is this area then subject to the Verona overlay district?
Yes.
And you're familiar with that, obviously, with the Holiday Inn stuff?
Ron Seawick is an architect with Dimension 4, he can.
Yeah, we discussed that with Mr. Sayre. I'm familiar with it.
Mr. Linder?
First of all, I really hope you can get something to work there. It's been, a funny spot for a long time, so I commend you for your effort. I remember the last plan that came through here, with all the right-of-way issues. Mike, I got more of a general question. Right now, the building's in the northwest corner of the property, and was there any thought about putting it in the southeast corner and have less deal with the right-of-way issues? And I guess what I'm getting at is that with a 3-story building right on the corner there, it reminds me a little bit of the Park Bank corner in town, and I'm not a super big fan of that because it just dominates that corner, and I'm a little bit worried something like this might do the same. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts or any.
I think we played with different ideas how to position it, and one of the comments we thought about, because again, the Holiday Inn, the city wanted mass to the street. They wanted that pushed as far out as we could, and we thought we would do the same thing with this building. The site has so many challenges that there is not a lot of options as far as positioning that building.
I know that would be counterintuitive to some of the other plans we've done. I just curious if you looked at it all, or you just decided because the city probably wouldn't do it, you didn't look very far into it. Is that
We
correct?
actually did look at a plan that more or less flipped the building, and put just kind of one leg out at the corner. But then it really, the parking lot becomes much more prominent, visually from the street than the building. So this tends to screen parking from Verona Avenue also. So.
Well, this one's a little bit farther back than the Park Bank too. It's not quite as close, so. I like to hear that the material's gonna be similar to Holiday Inn Express. I don't know, I hope we can work something out.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Lytle?
I know it's too soon to tell. With 3 stories set up, I don't know how much fill you're gonna have to take out, or you're obviously taking advantage of the way it's set up now to do parking, the underground parking coming in from the west. But we encourage you to do what you can to minimize 10-foot, 15-foot tall retaining walls as you come up with your final grading layout, and also what that would do to help make the building look more like a 3-story versus a 4-story.
Right. Yeah, as it's planned now, the first floor will be about 5 feet above the intersection of Verona and 9 Mile. And the driveway entrance off of Half Mile would be, you pretty much come in at the same elevation as the first floor. So, yeah, we're taking advantage of that natural grade as much as we can, and trying to minimize the building sort of being grossly elevated above the street.
Mr. Horsfall?
I think that was the issue we had with the 4 floors on the apartments that was proposed before, is that it just seemed out of place being so tall. So the Holiday Inn is 3 stories?
Yes, 3 stories.
So it'd be a similar kind of height as this one, do you think?
Yes,
Or
yes.
Close.
Okay, great. Then I'm with Patrick. If you can kind of get it to fit in there, that's, with all the other stuff you gotta deal with, that'd be great.
Other comments?
I'll just add, Mr. Mayor, the application has been sent in to Marriott, and we should hear approval on that this week. So then the next step would be working through the challenges the site has with stormwater and the land issues and the other things, so.
I think, first of all, I like what I see, and I commend you for stepping forward with this. Parking is my major issue, but I believe that you're exactly right. If we end up getting a lot of the Epic, clientele, they're not going to be driving, they're not going to have vehicles there. I guess the one other question that I would have is your delivery vehicles, delivering any of your goods to the hotel, where would they enter the facility? So they come in off of West Verona Avenue.
They could come in off of Half Mile too. Typically now the deliveries are received through the front entry, like at the Holiday Inn. It'd be similar. Delivery mechanism here would be through the front entry, because that's a close proximity to the breakfast area, and that's where most of the deliveries take place on a every other day basis. So, other than that, there's minimal deliveries. Other than that.
Okay. Other comments, suggestions, thoughts? Just go ahead, Mr. Linder.
One question I think I know the answer to. There's no restaurant, it's more of a breakfast type thing that's in that.
Correct. The hotel is what's in the industry known as limited service, the same as the Holiday Inn Express, a Hampton Inn, the Fairfield Inn and Suites. You're controlled by the brand as to what you can do. They don't want this hotel competing with a full-blown Marriott, where you got a bar and a full-blown restaurant. So you have minimal service where you just serve breakfast, and that's it. And that's usually a hot breakfast that's served in the morning.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate the feedback.
Before we adjourn, Mr. Sarah, Mr. Burns, Mr. Gunlock, anything else that we need to add? Okay. With that, a motion to adjourn would be in order. We have a motion by Mr. Horswell, second by...
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.